Well, I do know some men where it's just like you are paying attention on that game, talking to them people, arguing with them people, and you could be in my face. It is some men that needs to give their woman more attention, but it's just like the game is it just irritates me.
But men are stressed out. They come home, they want to play the game. It's freedom.
But why, as a grown man, do you want to come home and play with a controller? I got something.
You don't play video. You don't. You know what? I'm mad now. I'm upset. A man, this is like his only time of like having complete freedom and something to escape reality for 20 minutes, and you're trying to take it away from him.
Have you ever wondered what happens when society pushes people too far? When the scales tip so drastically that entire groups just walk away? The world is shifting, and men are choosing solitude over chaos, leaving behind a system that's punished them for decades. Yet women are furious, demanding men return to save them. Stay with me until the end, because I'm going to reveal the undeniable truth about why men are thriving in their independence and why this movement is reshaping the future in ways you won't believe. If you're fired up by this kind of no nonsense truth, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell and select all to get every single Angry Guy video the moment it drops. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's keep this momentum going. Want to take control of your financial future? Check out Angry's Crypto Academy, where you can learn how to protect and grow your wealth by mastering the art of buying, selling, and trading crypto. The link is in the description. Go check it out right now and start building the future you deserve. If you're enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. Every bit helps keep this channel delivering the raw truth you won't find anywhere else. Now let's dive into the heart of this. For decades, society has been waging a silent war on men, and most people didn't even notice. It started subtly with cultural shifts that seemed harmless at first, ideas about equality, fairness, and progress. But over time, those ideas morphed into something else entirely, a system designed to shame, control, and diminish men for simply existing. Feminism in its modern form became a weapon, not for equality, but for punishment. Women were told they didn't need men, that men were the problem, that masculinity itself was toxic. And men listened. They heard the message loud and clear. You're not wanted, you're not needed, so get out of the way. So that's exactly what they did. Men walked away, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. They looked at the world around them, saw the traps being set, and chose peace over chaos. And now, women are starting to feel the consequences of a society without men, and they're not happy about it. But here's the thing. Men aren't coming back, and they're finding joy in ways that nobody expected. And let's rewind and look at how we got here. 50 years ago, the world was a different place. Men and women had roles, not perfect, not without flaws, but roles that complemented each other. Families were built on mutual reliance. Men provided and protected. Women nurtured and supported. It wasn't about oppression. It was about survival in a harsh world. But then came the Cultural Revolution. Feminism swept through, promising liberation. And at first it sounded good. Who wouldn't want equality? Who wouldn't want fairness? But as the decades rolled on, the mask slipped. Feminism wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about power. It was about flipping the script, about elevating one group by tearing down another. Men were labeled the enemy, their every action scrutinized, their every instinct vilified. If a man sat a certain way, he was manspreading, a term invented to criminalize something as basic as sitting comfortably. If a man dared to speak to a woman, he risked being called a creep, shamed publicly, or worse, recorded and plastered online for the world to judge. The rules kept changing, and men were always the ones losing. The courts became another battleground. Family courts, divorce courts, civil courts, they turned into machines designed to extract wealth from men. Divorce became a jackpot for some women, with alimony and child support stretching on for years, even when the man had done nothing wrong. Paternity fraud became a cruel game, where men were forced to pay for children who weren't theirs, with no recourse. The legal system, once a place for justice, became a tool for punishment. Men saw their savings drained, their homes taken, their futures destroyed, all because they trusted the wrong person or dared to believe in the system. And it wasn't just the courts, society itself turned on men. Media portrayed them as bumbling idiots or dangerous predators, never as heroes. Schools started prioritizing girls, leaving boys to fall behind, their energy and ambition labeled as disruptive. The message was clear: men were the problem, and they needed to be fixed. But the real turning point came with the social campaigns. Movements like Hash Me Too started with good intentions, but quickly spiraled into witch hunts. Men were guilty until proven innocent, their reputations ruined with a single accusation, no evidence required. Women were encouraged to see every interaction as a threat, to weaponize their victimhood for power. A man glancing in the wrong direction at the gym could end up on TikTok, his face blasted to millions as a creep. A man offering a compliment risked losing his job. And then came the shaming rituals. Women would record men in public, not for any real crime, but for daring to exist in their space. These videos weren't about justice, they were about control, about humiliating men and reminding them who held the power. Men couldn't even sit on a bus or eat lunch without wondering if they'd be the next viral villain. And then there was the dating world, where the game was rigged from the start. Women demanded expensive dates, five-star restaurants, and lavish gestures, but the man had no chance at a real connection. It was transactional. A performance where men were expected to pay for the privilege of being tolerated. Apps like Tinder and Bumble turned dating into a marketplace where women held all the cards. They'd go on dates for free meals, ghost the guy, and then post about it online for clout. Groups like Are We Dating the Same Guy popped up, where women shared private details about men, not to warn others, but to destroy their reputations. It was a digital blacklist, a way to punish men for daring to try. And when men did everything right, paid for the date, respected boundaries, followed the rules, they were still ghosted, mocked, or accused of something. The message was clear: you can't win, so don't play. So men stopped playing. They walked away from dating, from relationships, from the whole circus. They realized something profound. Being alone isn't the same as feeling alone. Solitude became their sanctuary. Men started focusing on themselves, on their hobbies, their passions, their peace. They rediscovered the things that brought them joy, things society had tried to take away. Video games became a big part of that. Gaming wasn't just entertainment, it was a world where men could escape the chaos, where they could compete, create, and connect without judgment. Retro gaming, emulation, single player adventures, these became spaces where men could be themselves. They didn't have to worry about being shamed or accused. They didn't have to perform for anyone. It was freedom, pure and simple. But even that wasn't safe. Women, seeing men find happiness without them, turned their sights on gaming. They pushed for diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives, not to improve games, but to change them. They demanded characters and stories that aligned with their worldview, often at the expense of what made games fun for men. Entire genres were rewritten to prioritize messaging over enjoyment. Online communities, once a haven for men to connect, were flooded with moderators enforcing strict rules, banning players for harmless banter. The goal was clear: take away the one space where men could still find joy. If men couldn't have relationships, couldn't have careers without fear, couldn't even have hobbies, what was left? The answer was nothing. And that was the point. Women wanted men miserable, dependent, and broken because that's when they're easiest to control. But men didn't break. They adapted. They moved to retro games, to offline systems, to communities that couldn't be touched by corporate agendas. They built their own spaces, their own rules. And in doing so, they discovered something even more powerful: minimalism. Men are naturally inclined toward simplicity. They don't need much to be happy: a good game, a quiet space, a cold drink. So they started stripping away the excess. They sold the big houses, ditched the expensive cars, and stopped chasing status symbols. They kept their money, their time, their energy. They invested in themselves, in their skills, in their health. And for the first time in decades, Men started thriving. They weren't stressed about pleasing women or meeting society's demands. They weren't exhausted from fighting unwinnable battles. They were free. Meanwhile, women are starting to feel the weight of their choices. For years, they were told they didn't need men, that they could do it all on their own. The state stepped in, offering welfare, subsidies, and protections, creating a safety net that made men seem obsolete. But now the state is struggling. Economies are tightening, resources are scarce, and the safety net is fraying. Women are realizing that independence isn't as glamorous as it seemed. TikTok is filled with videos of women lamenting their struggles, bills they can't pay, loneliness they can't shake, lives that feel empty. Some beg for men to come back, others demand it, as if men owe them salvation. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. But men aren't listening. They've seen the patterns, recognized the games, and they're done. They're not falling for the tears or the tantrums. They're trusting their own eyes, their own logic, their own reality. This is where we are now, a world divided. Men have walked away, not because they hate women, but because they love themselves. They've chosen peace over chaos, simplicity over drama. They're building lives that don't revolve around approval or validation. They're finding joy in small things, games, hobbies, friendships, and they're not looking back. Women, on the other hand, are facing a reality they didn't expect. They pushed men away, believing the system would always catch them. But the system is failing and men aren't coming to the rescue. Society is starting to crack under the weight of its own contradictions, and the consequences are just beginning. The cracks in society aren't just visible, they're growing wider every day, and the fallout is impossible to ignore. For decades, men were the backbone of civilization, the ones who built the roads, fought the wars, and kept the lights on. They did it not for glory, but because it was their duty. Silent contract with the world that said, we'll hold it together no matter the cost. But that contract has been shredded. Men were told their sacrifices weren't enough, that their contributions were worthless, that their very existence was a problem to be solved. So they stepped back, and now the world is starting to feel what happens when the foundation crumbles. Women who once celebrated their independence are now grappling with a reality they weren't prepared for. They're discovering that the system, the one that promised to replace men with endless support, isn't as reliable as they thought. And men, they're not rushing in to fix it. They found something better, a life of their own making, free from the demands of a society that never valued them. Let's talk about what this looks like on the ground. Walk into any major city today, and you'll see the signs. Homelessness is spiking, not just among men, but among women too. The safety nets, welfare, housing programs, emergency funds are stretched thin. Governments are running out of money, and the days of endless handouts are coming to an end. Women who relied on those systems are now facing hard choices. They're working longer hours, taking on second jobs, or moving back in with family just to survive. Social media is flooded with their stories. Women posting about skyrocketing rent, grocery bills they can't afford, and a loneliness that cuts deeper than they expected. They're starting to realize that the strong, independent narrative they were sold came with a catch. Independence is brutal when the world stops propping you up. And where are the men who used to step in, who used to provide stability? They're gone. Not out of cruelty, but because they've learned a hard lesson. No one's coming to save them, so why should they save anyone else? This shift didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn, a series of choices that piled up until the tipping point was reached. Women spent decades rewriting the rules of society, and men adapted to every change, even when it meant losing ground. They faced public shaming, where a single misstep could cost them their reputation. They navigated a dating world that treated them like disposable wallets, expected to pay for everything while getting nothing in return. They endured a legal system that seemed designed to bleed them dry, from divorce settlements to false accusations with no consequences for the accuser. And through it all, they were told to shut up and take it, to be better, to fix themselves. But men aren't stupid. They saw the patterns. They recognized the double standards. And when they realized the game was rigged, they stopped playing. They walked away, not with a dramatic exit, but with a quiet resolve to live on their own terms. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about hating women. That's the lazy narrative society loves to push, the one that paints men as bitter or vengeful. The truth is far more nuanced. Men don't hate women, they're just done with the chaos. They're done with relationships that feel like walking on eggshells, where one wrong word could end in disaster. They're done with a culture that demands their labor, their money, and their loyalty, but offers nothing but criticism in return. Men have realized that happiness doesn't come from chasing approval or meeting someone else's expectations. It comes from within, from building a life that's simple, purposeful, and free. That's why you see men gravitating toward hobbies like gaming, not because they're escaping reality, but because they're creating their own. They're finding joy in virtual worlds where the rules are fair, where effort is rewarded, and where they don't have to justify their existence to anyone. But even gaming, that last bastion of freedom, is under siege. The same forces that reshape society are now targeting men's hobbies, determined to strip away anything that brings them peace. Look at the gaming industry today. Major studios, once focused on delivering fun, are now obsessed with agendas. They're rewriting stories, redesigning characters, and prioritizing messages over gameplay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives sound noble on paper, but in practice, they often mean alienating the very audience that built the industry. Male players who've been gaming since the days of pixelated sprites are being told their preferences don't matter. Classic franchises are being retooled to appeal to an audience that doesn't even play the games. Online platforms, once vibrant communities where men could joke and bond, are now policed with an iron fist. Say the wrong thing, even in jest, and you're banned. Your account erased, your digital home destroyed. The message is clear. Men aren't allowed to have spaces of their own, not even virtual ones. So what did men do? They adapted again. They turned to retro gaming, to emulators that let them revisit the classics, games made before the industry got tangled in politics. They built private servers, underground communities where they could play without interference. They went offline, diving into single player adventures that don't require an internet connection or a corporate overlord. This isn't just about nostalgia, it's about reclaiming control. Men are saying, if you won't give us a space, we'll make our own. And in doing so, they're rediscovering the power of simplicity. A retro console, a small TV, a quiet evening. That's enough. They don't need the latest $70 blockbuster or a subscription to a bloated streaming service. They're finding joy in the things that can't be taken away. And that's a kind of strength the world doesn't understand. This shift toward minimalism is one of the most profound changes we're seeing. Men, by nature, don't need much to thrive. They're not chasing Instagram perfect lives or validation from strangers. They're cutting out the noise, big houses, fancy cars, toxic relationships, and focusing on what matters. They're saving their money, not because they're greedy, but because they've seen how easily it can be taken. They're investing in skills, in health, in knowledge, because those are things no one can strip away. They're living lean, not out of poverty, but out of principle. And the result? They're happier than they've been in years. They're sleeping better, stressing less, and smiling more. They're not worried about impressing a date or keeping up with the Joneses. They're free, and freedom is the ultimate luxury. Contrast that with what women are facing. Social media paints a grim picture. Women posting about the grind of modern life, the exhaustion of juggling jobs and bills, the emptiness of a world that promised them everything but delivered so little. They were told they could have it all: career, family, independence without compromise. But reality doesn't work that way. The economy is squeezing everyone, and women are feeling it hard. Housing costs are through the roof, wages aren't keeping up, and the safety nets they counted on are unraveling. Dating, once a path to partnership, is now a minefield. Men aren't asking women out, not because they're afraid, but because they've done the math. A date costs time, money, and emotional energy with no guarantee of anything but rejection or drama. So men are opting out, and women are left wondering why their inboxes are empty, why their DMs are silent, why the world feels so cold. Some women are responding with desperation. You see it on TikTok, on Instagram, in the comment sections of videos like this one. They're begging men to come back, to step up, to be the providers they once were. Others are doubling down, demanding men return to the table they were kicked away from. But it's not working. Men have seen too much, learned too much. They've watched women weaponize emotions, manipulate narratives, and rewrite history to paint themselves as victims and men as villains. They've seen the apps where women share private details about dates, not to protect anyone, but to ruin reputations. They've seen the lawsuits, the public shaming, the endless accusations, and they've decided it's not worth it. They're not angry, they're rational. They're trusting their own observations, their own logic, over the words of a society that's lied to them for too long. This isn't a victory lap for men. It's not about gloating or settling scores. It's about survival. Men have realized that the world doesn't care about them, so they have to care about themselves. They've stopped looking for validation from women, from media, from anyone. They're building lives that don't depend on external approval. And that's a quiet revolution. They're finding peace in solitude, strength in simplicity, joy in the things they control. And the world is starting to notice. You can see it in the panic of certain voices, the ones who realize that men walking away isn't just a trend, it's a movement, it's a statement. We don't need you, and we're better off without you. But the story isn't over. Society is at a crossroads, and what happens next depends on how people respond. Will women acknowledge the role they've played in pushing men away? Will they take a hard look at the systems, legal, cultural, social, that have created this divide? Or will they double down, blaming men for the consequences of their own choices? And what about men? Will they keep walking away, building their own paths? Or will some be lured back by promises that sound too good to be true? These are the questions we're facing, and the answers will shape the future. For now, men are choosing themselves, and that choice is sending ripples through every corner of society. The ripples of men walking away are turning into waves, and society is starting to feel the impact in ways that can't be ignored. This isn't just about individual choices anymore. It's about a fundamental shift in how people relate to each other, how they see their roles, and how they navigate a world that's been turned upside down. Men have chosen to prioritize themselves, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. They've seen the writing on the wall, a culture that demands everything from them while offering nothing in return, a system that punishes them for existing, a dating landscape that's more like a battlefield than a path to connection. So, they've opted out, and the consequences are unfolding in real time. Women are waking up to a reality where the safety nets they took for granted are fraying, where the men they pushed away aren't coming back, and where the promises of independence are starting to feel like a trap. This is the new world we're living in, and it's time to face it head on. Let's start with the economy, because money is where the rubber meets the road. For years, women were told that they could rely on the state, welfare, subsidies, grants to cushion their lives. These programs were sold as empowerment, a way to break free from dependence on men. And for a while, it worked. Single mothers got support, career women got tax breaks, and the system seemed to hum along. But now, the cracks are showing. Governments are drowning in debt, inflation is eating away at savings, and the cost of living is squeezing everyone. Those safety nets, they're not as sturdy as they used to be. Welfare checks don't stretch as far when groceries cost twice what they did a few years ago. Housing programs have wait lists that stretch for years. And the jobs that were supposed to lead to financial freedom, they're not paying enough to keep up with rent, let alone build a future. Women are feeling the pinch, and they're starting to realize that independence often means struggling alone. You can see the evidence all over social media. Scroll through TikTok or Instagram, and you'll find women sharing raw, unfiltered stories about their lives. They talk about working 60-hour weeks just to afford a one-bedroom apartment. They post about the loneliness of coming home to an empty house, no one to share the load. Some are brutally honest about the dating scene, admitting that men aren't asking them out, aren't sliding into their DMs, aren't showing up at all. These aren't just anecdotes, they're patterns. Women are facing a world where the systems they trusted are faltering, and the men they expected to fall back on are nowhere to be found. It's not just about money, it's about emotional and social stability. Humans are wired for connection, for partnership, but the cultural shifts of the last few decades have made that harder than ever. Women are starting to feel the weight of a society that's unraveling, and they're not sure how to fix it. Now, let's talk about why men aren't stepping in. It's not because they're heartless or vindictive, it's because they've been through the ringer and they've learned their lesson. For decades, men faced a barrage of criticism and punishment. They were told their masculinity was toxic, their instincts were wrong, their very presence was a problem. Movements like Hash Me Too, which started with good intentions, morphed into tools for public shaming. A single accusation, even without evidence, could destroy a man's career, his reputation, his life. Men saw friends, coworkers, strangers lose everything over a misinterpreted comment or a fleeting glance. They watched as the rules kept shifting, as the goalposts moved, as the definition of acceptable behavior became a minefield. And they decided it wasn't worth the risk. Why put yourself out there when the reward is uncertain and the punishment is guaranteed? The dating world only reinforced this. Men were expected to play a game where the odds were stacked against them. They had to plan the perfect date, pay for everything, and perform like a trained actor, all while knowing the woman might ghost them the next day. Apps like Tinder turned dating into a numbers game where men swiped endlessly for a chance at a response, only to be met with silence or demands for more. More money, more effort, more everything. Women created online groups to share details about the men they dated, not to protect each other, but to gossip, to judge, to ruin. A man could do everything right, be respectful, generous, attentive, and still end up as the punchline in a viral post. So, men started doing the math. A date costs $100, $200, maybe more, with no guarantee of a connection. A relationship means emotional investment, time, and the constant risk of being labeled the bad guy. And for what? A fleeting moment of approval? Men decided it wasn't worth it and they walked away. But walking away didn't mean giving up. It meant redirecting their energy. Men started focusing on themselves, on the things they could control. They poured their time into hobbies, skills, and personal growth. For many, gaming became a cornerstone of this new life, not because they're addicted or immature, as the critics love to claim, but because gaming offers something the real world doesn't: fairness. In a game, the rules are clear. If you put in the work, you get results. If you fail, you learn and try again. There's no hidden agenda, no shifting standards, no one waiting to shame you for a misstep. Games, especially retro ones, are a refuge where men can compete, create, and connect without fear. They're not escaping reality, they're building a better one where their efforts are rewarded and their contributions matter. This is where the culture war gets ugly. The same forces that reshaped society, media, corporations, and activists have set their sights on gaming. They see men finding joy in these virtual worlds and they can't stand it. So they're trying to take it away. Major game studios are pumping out titles that prioritize messaging over fun, rewriting beloved franchises to align with political agendas. Characters that fans grew up with are being replaced or reimagined to fit a narrative that feels forced. Gameplay mechanics are being dumbed down to appeal to an audience that doesn't even play. And the online spaces where gamers used to hang out, they're being sanitized, policed by moderators who ban players for the slightest infraction. The goal isn't to make gaming better, it's to make it unwelcoming for men, to drive them out of the one space where they still feel free. It's a power grab, plain and simple, and men see it for what it is. But men aren't sitting still. They're fighting back, not with protests or hashtags, but with their wallets and their time. They're abandoning big budget games and turning to indie developers, retro consoles, and emulators. They're building private servers where they can play with friends, free from corporate oversight. They're diving into single player games that don't require an internet connection or a subscription. This isn't just about gaming, it's about sovereignty. Men are reclaiming their right to enjoy their hobbies, to spend their time how they choose, without someone looking over their shoulder. And in doing so, they're sending a message. You can't control us, not here, not anymore. This shift toward independence goes beyond gaming. It's a lifestyle. Men are embracing minimalism, not because they're broke, but because they're smart. They've seen how easily material things can be taken away: houses, cars, savings. So they're focusing on what lasts. They're living in smaller spaces, not because they have to, but because they want to. Studio apartment with a gaming setup, a gym membership, and a few good books. That's enough. They're saving their money not for status symbols, but for freedom. They're learning skills, coding, mechanics, cooking, because knowledge is power. They're staying fit, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong in their own skin. This is what thriving looks like, and it's a far cry from the exhausted, overworked, overstressed lives men were living a decade ago. Meanwhile, women are starting to see the other side of the independence they were promised. The media sold them a dream, a glamorous life of career success, travel, and endless choices. But the reality is grittier. Many are working jobs they hate, barely covering their bills, and wondering why their social circles feel so empty. Dating apps, once a source of excitement, are now a slog. Endless swiping, shallow conversations, and men who don't follow through. Women are posting about the frustration of being ghosted, of planning dates that never happen, of feeling invisible in a world that's supposed to celebrate them. Some are turning to self help gurus or manifestation trends, hoping to fix what's broken, but the answers aren't there. The truth is, the system lied to them. It told them they could have it all without compromise, but life doesn't work that way. Choices have consequences, and the bill is coming due. This isn't about blame, it's about reality. Women were encouraged to push men away, to see them as optional, to build lives that didn't need them. And they did. They used the courts, the media, the culture to reshape the world in their image. But now, that world is showing its limits. The economy can't sustain endless entitlements. The dating market can't function when one side opts out. Society can't thrive when half its population is just alienated. Women are starting to feel the weight of these truths, and some are responding with anger, others with desperation. You see it in the comment sections, in the viral videos, in the public meltdowns. They want men to come back, to fix things, to make it all better. But men aren't listening. They've heard the demands, seen the tears, and they're not buying it. They're too busy building lives that don't depend on anyone else's approval. So, where does this leave us? We're at a turning point, a moment where the choices we make will define the future. Men have chosen their path: independence to simplicity, peace. They're not looking back, not because they're stubborn, but because they've seen what's behind them. They've learned to trust their own judgment, to rely on observable reality over empty promises. Women, meanwhile, are facing a reckoning. Some will adapt, finding ways to navigate this new world with resilience and humility. Others will double down, clinging to the narratives that got us here. And society? It's going to have to figure out how to function when the old rules no longer apply. The days of men carrying the load while being vilified are over. The days of endless safety nets are fading. This is the new reality, and it's time for everyone to face it. The new reality we're facing isn't just a passing phase, it's a seismic shift that's reshaping the very foundations of society. Men walking away from relationships, from dating, from the expectations placed on them isn't just a personal choice. It's a collective response to a world that's been squeezing them dry for decades. They've seen through the illusions, the promises, the narratives that told them to keep sacrificing, keep providing, keep enduring, all while being told they're the problem. And now they're done. They're building lives that prioritize their own happiness, their own peace, their own terms. Meanwhile, women are staring down the barrel of a future they didn't expect, one where the systems they relied on are buckling and the men they pushed away aren't coming back to pick up the pieces. This is the story of a society at its breaking point, and the consequences are only just beginning to unfold. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Society has always been a delicate balance of roles, responsibilities, and mutual reliance. Men and women, for all their differences, work together to keep things running, not because it was perfect, but because it was practical. Men took on the heavy lifting, the dangerous jobs, the roles that required physical and emotional endurance. Women brought stability, nurturing, and a focus on the home front. It wasn't about superiority or oppression, it was about survival. But somewhere along the line, that balance was disrupted. Cultural movements, fueled by ideology, decided that roles were chains, that reliance was weakness, that men's contributions were disposable. Women were told they could do it all, that they didn't need men, that the state and the system would catch them if they fell. Men were told to step aside, to check their privilege, to apologize for existing, and for a while, it seemed like the new way might work. But reality has a way of catching up, and now we're seeing what happens when you dismantle the foundation of a functioning society. The economy is the canary in the coal mine. For years, governments propped up the idea of independence with endless programs, welfare, housing assistance, education grants, designed to make men seem optional. Women were encouraged to pursue careers, to delay marriage, to live life on their terms, with the state as their safety net. But those programs were built on borrowed money, on the assumption that growth would never slow, that taxes would always flow, that the system could sustain itself indefinitely. That's not how the world works. Nations are drowning in debt, inflation is eroding purchasing power, and the cost of living is outpacing wages. The safety nets are fraying, wait lists for assistance are growing, benefits are being cut, and the middle class is shrinking. Women who bought into the promise of independence are now facing a harsh truth. The system can't replace the stability that men once provided, and it's not going to save them when the money runs out. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the evidence. Social media is a window into the struggles people are facing. Women are posting about the grind of modern life, working overtime to afford rent, skipping meals to pay utility bills, moving back in with parents because they can't make ends meet. They're sharing stories of burnout, of mental health struggles, of a loneliness that lingers like a shadow. These aren't isolated cases, they're part of a broader trend. Studies show that single women are increasingly anxious about their financial future, with many reporting they can't save for retirement or emergencies. The dream of a glamorous, independent life, complete with brunches, vacations, and a corner office, is fading, replaced by the reality of long hours, high costs, and an uncertain tomorrow. And the men who might have shared the load, who might have built a life alongside them, they're not there anymore, not because they don't care, but because they've been pushed too far. This brings us to the heart of the divide, the collapse of relationships, that dating, once a cornerstone of human connection, has become a casualty of the culture war. Women spent decades reshaping the rules of engagement, and men have responded by opting out. It's not hard to see why. Men face a dating world where the risks far outweigh the rewards. A single date can cost hundreds of dollars with no guarantee of a second one. A relationship means navigating a minefield of expectations where one wrong move, a misinterpreted text, a poorly timed joke can lead to public shaming or worse. Men have seen what happens when things go south: accusations that ruin reputations, legal battles that drain savings, social media pile-ons that destroy lives. They've watched as women weaponize their emotions, turning personal disputes into public spectacles. And they've decided it's not worth it. Why roll the dice when the game is rigged? The data backs this up. Marriage rates are at historic lows, with fewer men proposing or even dating. Birth rates are plummeting as young people, especially men, choose to stay single rather than start families. Online, men are openly discussing their decision to go their own way, sharing stories of how they found peace in solitude. They're not angry or bitter, they're pragmatic. They've done the math and realized that the cost of relationships, emotional, financial, social, is too high. Instead, they're investing in themselves. They're hitting the gym, learning new skills, building side hustles. They're spending their evenings with friends, with games, with hobbies that bring them joy. They're not running from responsibility, they're redefining it, choosing to be responsible for their own happiness rather than someone else's. Women, meanwhile, are starting to feel the absence. Dating apps, once buzzing with activity, are quieter now. Women report getting fewer matches, fewer messages, fewer dates. They're posting about the frustration of being ghosted, of men who seem interested but never commit. Some blame men, calling them commitment phobes or immature, but that's missing the point. Men aren't afraid, they're strategic. They've seen how relationships can end, how quickly things can turn sour, how little protection they have when they do. They've heard the stories of friends who lost everything in a divorce, of coworkers who were fired over a single complaint, of strangers who were vilified online for no reason, and they've decided to protect themselves. They're not saying never to relationships, they're saying not like this. Until the rules change, until the risks are balanced, they're staying on the sidelines. This shift has ripple effects that go beyond dating. Families aren't forming at the same rate, which means fewer children, fewer households, fewer communities. Businesses that rely on family spending, daycare, schools, retailers, are feeling the pinch. The housing market, once buoyed by young couples buying starter homes, is stagnating as more people stay single and rent. Even the social fabric is fraying as people retreat into their own corners, less connected, less invested in each other. Women are noticing this too. They're talking about the loneliness of single life, the difficulty of building friendships, the sense that something's missing. They were told independence would be empowering, but for many it feels isolating. The system promised them freedom, but it didn't warn them about the cost. Now let's talk about the cultural forces driving this wedge deeper. The media plays a big role, painting men as the eternal villains and women as the eternal victims. Every TV show, every movie, every news story seems to follow the same script. Men are flawed, women are flawless. This narrative doesn't just shape public opinion, it shapes policy. Laws are written to favor women, from family courts to workplace regulations, creating a system where men are guilty until proven innocent. Social media amplifies this, with platforms rewarding outrage and punishment. A woman can post a video accusing a man of anything and it'll go viral, no questions asked. A man trying to defend himself, he's drowned out, banned, or worse. This isn't equality, it's a power imbalance, and men have taken note. They're not fighting the system, they're leaving it behind. The gaming world, as we've discussed, is another battleground. It's no coincidence that gaming has become a flashpoint. For men, games are more than entertainment. They're a refuge, a place where they can escape the noise and be themselves. but the industry influenced by the same cultural forces is trying to take that away. Big studios are churning out games that feel like lectures with heavy handed messages about identity and morality. Fan favorite characters are being rewritten, classic stories retconned, all to align with an agenda that alienates the core audience. Online communities, once lively hubs of camaraderie, are now policed to the point of sterility. The goal is clear: make gaming unappealing to men, drive them out, and claim the space for someone else. But men aren't giving up. They're turning to indie games, to retro systems, to private servers where they can play by their own rules. It's a microcosm of the larger trend. When the world tries to control you, you find a way to carve out your own space. This brings us to the concept of minimalism, which is at the heart of men's response. Men don't need much to be happy, a fact society seems to have forgotten. They're not chasing mansions or designer clothes or social media clout. They're simplifying their lives, focusing on what brings them joy and security. A small apartment, a reliable car, a good gaming setup, that's enough. They're saving their money not for status, but for freedom. They're learning skills, coding, woodworking, fitness, because those are investments that can't be taken away. They're building networks of friends who share their values, creating communities that don't rely on mainstream approval. This isn't about retreating from the world, it's about redefining success. Men are proving that you don't need to play by society's rules to live a good life. Women, on the other hand, are grappling with a different reality. The cultural narrative told them to aim high: big careers, big houses, big lives. But the cost of that ambition is becoming clear. Many are working harder than ever, with less to show for it. They're facing a dating market that's dried up, a social scene that's fractured, and a future that's uncertain. Some are starting to question the path they've been sold, wondering if the pursuit of having it all was worth it. Others are doubling down, insisting that men need to step up and fix things. But men aren't listening. They've seen the patterns, recognized the games, and they're not falling for it. They're too busy living lives that don't revolve around someone else's expectations. So, what's next? Society can't keep going like this, divided, disconnected, with half its population checking out. Something's got to give. Maybe it's a cultural reckoning where people start questioning the narratives that got us here. Maybe it's a policy shift where laws and systems are rewritten to be fairer, to incentivize cooperation rather than conflict. Or maybe the divide just keeps growing with men and women drifting further apart, each side building their own version of the future. Whatever happens, one thing is clear: men walking away isn't a trend, it's a movement, and it's not going away. They've tasted freedom, and they're not giving it up. The movement of men walking away is no longer a whisper, it's a roar, echoing through every corner of society. This isn't just about a few guys opting out of dating or skipping the latest blockbuster game. It's about a fundamental realignment of priorities, a rejection of a system that's been bleeding men dry for generations. Men have seen in the truth a world that demands their labor, their loyalty, their sacrifice, while offering nothing but blame and shame in return. They've chosen to step back, to build lives that answer to their own values, not the expectations of a culture that's turned its back on them. And as they do, the foundations of society are trembling. Women are facing a future they weren't prepared for, where the promises of independence are crumbling under the weight of reality. The economy, the social fabric, the very idea of community, all are straining as the consequences of this divide come into sharp focus. This is the world we're living in, and it's time to unpack what it means for everyone. Let's start with the cultural landscape, because that's where this battle is being fought most fiercely. And for decades, men have been bombarded with messages that their very existence is a problem. Media, from sitcoms to news outlets, has painted them as either incompetent fools or dangerous threats, rarely as heroes or leaders. Schools have shifted focus, prioritizing girls' education while boys are left to flounder, their energy branded as disruptive, their struggles ignored. The workplace has become a minefield where a single misstep, a compliment, a joke, a glance can cost a man his job. And the public square, it's a digital coliseum where men are dragged through the mud for sport, their lives dissected by strangers on social media. This isn't progress, it's punishment, a deliberate campaign to diminish men and keep them in line. But men aren't staying in line anymore. They're walking away, and the culture is starting to feel the void. This void is most obvious in relationships or the lack of them. Dating, once a natural part of life, has become a high stakes gamble for men. The rules are unclear, the risks are sky high, and the rewards are uncertain at best. A man can spend hundreds of dollars on a date, follow every social cue, and still end up ghosted, mocked, or worse, accused of something he didn't do. Online, women share stories of their dates in groups designed to humiliate, not inform, turning personal interactions into public trials. The legal system looms large, with men knowing that a single claim, true or not, can ruin their lives. Divorce courts, family courts, civil courts have become machines that extract wealth and dignity from men, often with no recourse. So men have done what any rational person would do. They've stopped playing the game. They're not dating, not proposing, not chasing relationships that feel like traps. They've realized that solitude is better than servitude, and they're finding peace in their own company. But this isn't just about dating, it's about the ripple effects. Fewer relationships mean fewer marriages, fewer families, fewer children. Birth rates are dropping across the developed world, with some countries facing demographic crises that threaten their economies. Fewer families mean fewer homes being built, fewer schools being filled, fewer businesses catering to young couples. The housing market is cooling as single men opt for minimalist apartments over suburban starter homes. Retailers, from baby stores to wedding planners, are struggling as the demand for family oriented goods and services dries up. Even the social safety nets, pensions, healthcare, welfare are under strain because they were designed for a society with growing populations, not shrinking ones. Men walking away isn't just a personal choice, it's a systemic shock. And we're only beginning to see the fallout. Women are feeling this shock most acutely. For years, they were told they could have it all: a thriving career, a fulfilling personal life, and the freedom to choose their path without compromise. The state stepped in to make it possible, offering subsidies, protections, and programs that seemed to render men obsolete. But now, those systems are faltering. Governments are cutting budgets, inflation is eating away at savings, and the cost of living is pushing people to the brink. Women are working harder than ever, often in jobs that don't pay enough to cover rent, let alone build wealth. Social media is filled with their stories: women juggling multiple jobs, skipping vacations, and wondering how they'll ever retire. They're facing a loneliness that's harder to shake as friendships fade and dating becomes a distant memory. The promise of independence was supposed to be empowering, but for many, it feels like a sentence to struggle alone. You can see the desperation in the way some women are responding. Online, they're posting videos begging men to step up, to return to the dating scene, to take on the provider role they were once vilified for. Others are lashing out, blaming men for their struggles, accusing them of being selfish or immature. But these reactions miss the point. Men aren't walking away because they're weak or scared. They're walking away because they're wise. They've seen how the system works against them, how quickly a relationship can turn into a liability, how little protection they have when things go wrong. They've watched as women use social media to shame them, courts to drain them, and culture to demonize them. And they've decided to protect themselves. They're not saying no to relationships forever. They're saying no to relationships that come with a loaded gun pointed at their heads. This brings us to the question of accountability. For too long, the narrative has been one sided, with men cast as the villains and women as the victims. But reality is more complicated. Women have played a role in creating this divide, whether they meant to or not. They embraced movements that punished men for their nature, that turned every interaction into a potential crime. They supported systems, legal, social, cultural, that tilted the playing field in their favor, often at the expense of fairness. They celebrated independence while ignoring the men who made it possible, the ones who built the infrastructure, paid the taxes, and kept society running. Now, as those men walk away, women are facing the consequences of a world without them. It's not about blame, it's about cause and effect. Actions have outcomes, and we're living with the results. But men aren't just walking away from relationships, they're walking away from a culture that's tried to strip them of their identity. Gaming, as we've discussed, is a prime example. For men, games are a sanctuary, a place where they can be themselves without judgment. But the industry, influenced by the same forces that reshape society, is trying to take that away. Big studios are churning out games that prioritize agendas over enjoyment, rewriting beloved franchises to align with cultural trends. Online communities, once vibrant hubs of connection, are now policed to the point of silence. The goal is to make gaming a space where men don't feel welcome, to drive them out of their last refuge. But men are fighting back, not with anger, but with ingenuity. They're turning to retro games, indie developers, and private servers, creating spaces where they can play on their terms. It's a small act of defiance, but it's powerful. A reminder that men won't be controlled, not even in their hobbies. This defiance extends to every part of their lives. Men are embracing a philosophy of minimalism, not out of necessity, but out of strength. They're simplifying their worlds, focusing on what they can control. They're living in smaller spaces, not because they're poor, but because they value freedom over status. They're saving their money, not for flashy cars or designer clothes, but for security and opportunity. They're learning skills, coding, mechanics, fitness, because knowledge is a currency that can't be devalued. They're building networks of like minded men, not to exclude others, but to create communities that share their values. This isn't about running from responsibility, it's about redefining it. Men are choosing to be responsible for their own happiness, their own futures, rather than carrying the weight of a society that doesn't appreciate them. Contrast this with the struggles women are facing. The cultural narrative told them to chase big dreams, high powered careers, global adventures, lives of endless possibility. But the reality is less glamorous. Many are stuck in jobs that demand long hours for little pay, with no clear path to advancement. They're drowning in student debt, credit card bills, and rent payments that eat up half their income. Social media, once a place to showcase their success, is now a mirror reflecting their exhaustion. Women are posting about the grind, the loneliness, the fear of a future they can't afford. They're wondering why their dating apps are empty, why their social circles are shrinking, why life feels so heavy. The system promised them empowerment, but it didn't tell them about the trade offs. Independence sounds great until you're facing it alone with no one to lean on when things get tough. Some women are starting to see the bigger picture. They're questioning the narratives they've been fed, the ones that said men were optional, that the state would always provide, that they could have it all without sacrifice. They're realizing that relationships, for all their challenges, were a source of stability, a way to share the load. They're seeing that the men they pushed away were the ones building the world they took for granted, the roads, the buildings, the systems that keep life running. But others are stuck, clinging to the idea that men are the problem, that they need to fix themselves and come back. These women are missing the point. Men aren't broken, they're awake. They've seen the patterns, recognized the risks, and chosen a path that protects their peace. They're not coming back to a system that punishes them, not without real change. So, what would change look like? It starts with honesty. Society needs to have a real conversation about the roles men and women play, about the balance that makes communities work. We need to rethink the systems, legal, cultural, economic, that have created this divide. Family courts need to prioritize fairness over favoritism, ensuring that men aren't stripped of their livelihoods over a single decision. Media needs to stop vilifying men and start showing them as complex, valuable contributors. Dating culture needs to evolve, moving away from transactional games and toward mutual respect. And women need to take a hard look at their own choices, recognizing how their actions, individually and collectively, have shaped this moment. It's not about pointing fingers, it's about building a future where both sides can thrive. But for now, men are focused on themselves. And that's not a bad thing. They're proving that happiness doesn't come from meeting someone else's expectations, it comes from living authentically. They're finding joy in simple things: a good game, a quiet evening, a conversation with friends. They're building lives that don't depend on external validation. And that's a kind of strength the world doesn't understand. As society grapples with the consequences of this shift, men are showing the way forward, not by fighting, not by complaining, but by living well. They're walking away from chaos and toward peace, and that's a legacy worth building. The legacy of men walking away is not just a moment in time, it's a turning point that will define the future for generations. This movement, born out of necessity and forged in the fires of a culture that turned its back on men, is reshaping society in ways that are both profound and irreversible. Men have chosen to reject a system that demands their sacrifice while offering nothing but criticism. And in doing so, they've rediscovered their own strength, their own purpose, their own peace. They're building lives that don't revolve around pleasing others or chasing approval, lives rooted in simplicity, self reliance, and joy. Meanwhile, women are grappling with the fallout of a world they helped create, one where the promises of independence are crumbling under the weight of economic strain, social isolation, and a dating landscape that's all but collapsed. This is the reality we're living in, and it's time to explore what it means for the road ahead. Let's start with the men because their choice is the catalyst for this shift. For decades, men were told they were the problem: too aggressive, too privileged, too flawed. Every aspect of their lives was scrutinized, from how they sat on a bus to how they spoke to a colleague. Media portrayed them as villains or buffoons. Schools penalized their energy, and workplaces turned into traps where a single misstep could end a career. The dating world was no better: a gauntlet of rejection, manipulation, and risk, where men were expected to pay for the privilege of being judged. The legal system became a weapon, with courts stripping men of their wealth, their children, their dignity, often on nothing more than an accusation. And through it all, men were told to grin and bear it, to be better, to fix themselves for a world that didn't want them. But men aren't fools. They saw the patterns, weighed the costs, and made a choice. They walked away, not out of anger, but out of clarity. This choice has led to a renaissance of sorts. Men are rediscovering what makes them happy, and it's not what society expects. They're not chasing mansions or corner offices or social media clout. They're embracing minimalism, not because they're broke, but because they're wise. A small apartment, a reliable gaming setup, a few good friends. That's enough. They're saving their money not for status symbols, but for freedom, for the ability to live life on their terms. They're learning skills: coding, fitness, mechanics, because knowledge is power that can't be taken away. They're building communities, not to exclude others, but to connect with those who share their values. This isn't about retreating from the world, it's about redefining it, about proving that happiness comes from within, not from meeting someone else's demands. Gaming remains a cornerstone of this new life, and it's worth revisiting why. Games, especially retro ones, offer men something the real world rarely does: fairness. In a game, the rules are clear, the rewards are earned, and failure is a chance to learn, not a public shaming. Single player adventures, emulators, indie titles, these are spaces where men can be themselves, where they can compete, create, and connect without fear of judgment. But even this sanctuary is under attack. The gaming industry, influenced by cultural forces, is trying to reshape it into something men don't recognize. Big studios are prioritizing agendas over fun, rewriting beloved franchises to align with trends that alienate their core audience. Online communities, once havens of camaraderie, are now policed to the point of silence, with bans handed out for harmless banter. The goal is to make gaming unwelcoming, to drive men out of their last refuge. But men are adapting. They're turning to private servers, offline systems, and indie developers, proving that they'll find a way to keep their spaces no matter what. This adaptability is key to understanding men's response. They're not fighting the system head on. That's a losing game. Instead, they're sidestepping it, building parallel lives that don't rely on mainstream approval. They're opting out of corporate jobs for freelance gigs or side hustles that give them control. They're skipping the overpriced housing market for minimalist setups that keep their costs low. They're avoiding relationships that feel like contracts with hidden clauses, choosing solitude over drama. This isn't about giving up, it's about winning on their own terms. Men are proving that you don't need society's permission to live well, that you can thrive by focusing on what matters: your health, your skills, your peace, and the results speak for themselves. Men are reporting lower stress, better sleep, more savings. They're smiling more, not because life is perfect, but because it's theirs. Now, let's turn to the other side of this divide. Women are facing a reality that's far different from the one they were promised. For years, they were told they could have it all: a dazzling career, a vibrant social life, a family if they wanted it, all without needing men. The state backed this up with programs, welfare, education grants, housing assistance that made independence seem not just possible, but glamorous. Media celebrated the strong, independent woman as the ideal, while men were relegated to the sidelines, portrayed as optional at best, obstacles at worst. But now, the cracks in this narrative are impossible to ignore. The economy is tightening, with inflation and rising costs making it harder to get by. Safety nets are shrinking, with wait lists for assistance growing longer every year. Jobs, even high paying ones, aren't enough to cover the basics: rent, groceries, healthcare, let alone build a future. Social media is a raw, unfiltered look at the struggle. Women are posting about the grind, working 70-hour weeks to afford a studio apartment, skipping meals to pay off debt, moving back in with family because they can't make rent. They're sharing stories of burnout, of mental health challenges, of a loneliness that lingers like a fog. Dating, once a source of excitement, is now a source of frustration. Women report getting fewer matches, fewer messages, fewer dates. They're wondering why men aren't asking them out, why their inboxes are empty, why the world feels so cold. Some are turning to self help trends or online communities for answers. But the solutions are shallow, unable to address the deeper issue. The system lied to them. It told them they could thrive without men, without relationships, without compromise. But life doesn't work that way. Independence is a double edged sword, and many are feeling its sharper side. This reality is driving a range of responses. Some women are reflecting, questioning the cultural narratives that led them here. They're starting to see the value of relationships not as a surrender of independence, but as a partnership that shares the load. They're recognizing that men, for all their flaws, were the ones building the world they took for granted, the infrastructure, the economy, the stability. But others are doubling down, insisting that men are the problem, that they need to step up and fix everything. They're posting videos demanding that men return to the dating scene, take on provider roles, make life easier. But these demands are falling on deaf ears. Men have seen too much, learned too much. They've watched as women use social media to shame them, courts to drain them, culture to vilify them. They're not angry, they're rational. They're choosing peace over chaos, and they're not coming back to a system that punishes them. This divide raises a critical question. Where do we go from here? Society can't function like this with half its population opting out and the other half struggling to hold it together. The demographic crisis alone is a ticking time bomb. Fewer births mean fewer workers, fewer taxpayers, fewer people to sustain the systems we rely on. The economy is already feeling the strain, with industries like housing, retail, and education facing declining demand. Social cohesion is fraying as people retreat into their own corners, less connected, less invested in each other. If we keep going down this path, the future looks grim. A society of isolated individuals scraping by in a world that's too expensive, too divided, too broken to sustain itself. But there's another path, one that starts with honesty and accountability. Honesty means facing the truth about how we got here. Women need to acknowledge the role they've played, not as individuals, but as part of a culture that reshaped society. They embraced movements that punished men, supported systems that tilted the playing field, celebrated independence while ignoring the men who made it possible. Men, for their part, need to stay true to their path, not out of spite, but out of self respect. They found something valuable: peace, purpose, freedom, and they shouldn't give it up for empty promises. Society needs to rethink its systems, from family courts to media narratives, to create a balance that incentivizes cooperation, not conflict. Dating culture needs to evolve, moving away from games and toward mutual respect. And we all need to recognize that no one thrives in isolation. Humans are built for connection, and we need to find a way to rebuild it. For now, men are leading by example. They're showing that you don't need society's approval to live well, that you can find joy in simple things: a good game, a quiet evening, a life you control. They're proving that strength isn't about carrying the world's weight, it's about carrying your own. As women grapple with the consequences of a world without men, they'll need to decide how to respond. Some will adapt, finding ways to navigate this new reality with resilience and humility. Others will resist, clinging to narratives that no longer serve them. And society, it will either find a way to bridge this divide or fracture further under the strain. The choice is ours. But one thing is clear: men walking away is a wake-up call, and we'd be wise to listen. This isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Men are writing their own rules, building lives that reflect their values, not society's demands. They're finding peace in solitude, strength in simplicity, joy in the things they love, and they're not looking back. As the world watches, as women struggle, as society teeters, men are showing the way forward, not by fighting, not by complaining, but by living well. They're proving that the greatest act of rebellion is to be happy, to be free, to be yourself in a world that wants you to be something else. And that's a legacy that will outlast us all. So, what did you think about what we discussed today? Do you agree with the points I've made, or do you see things differently? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I want to hear what you're thinking, what this means to you, and how you're navigating this changing world. Your voice matters, and this conversation is just getting started. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you found value in this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Just remember, all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.